Hello, I'm Erika Wong, and welcome to Debunking Nutrition Lore. Today, we're going to be answering some of your frequently asked questions. I am a registered dietitian nutritionist, and I have a master's in clinical nutrition and started working in corporate wellness, doing nutrition consultations, providing group nutrition workshops, and my favorite part, which is teaching cooking classes. So with that, let's get into the questions. Does the consumption of egg yolks increase cholesterol? The answer here is not so straightforward. It's a bit of yes and no. We know that dietary cholesterol actually has less of an impact on blood cholesterol than what we once thought. So that's good news for the egg lovers out there. We know that eating saturated fat actually has much more of an impact on our blood cholesterol. So let's break that down a little bit. Saturated fat is going to be found in animal foods. So things like your butter, ice cream, steak, burgers, our favorite foods like pizza, cheese, high-fat dairy. Those are going to be our saturated fat foods. And we know that consuming too much saturated fat is what elevates our blood cholesterol. So that's where a little bit of the confusion has come in over the years, is that it would make sense that eating cholesterol raises our blood cholesterol, but it's actually not that straightforward. Really, the nutrient we want to be watching more carefully is saturated fat intake. And what's a little bit tricky about that is that saturated fat can also be hiding in certain foods, not just the obvious, big steak you might get at a restaurant or a big, Big Mac or something, but it's also in foods that are less obvious, like let's say a protein bar. A lot of those are going to have 4, 5, 6 grams of saturated fat, for example. And just to put it in perspective, we don't really need much more than 10, 15 grams of saturated fat in a day. We don't need any in a day, but we want to keep tabs on that total intake. So what I usually will tell people is, if you enjoy eggs, if you want to include them in breakfast or throughout the day, the American Heart Association states that healthy people can consume up to a whole egg per day. If you're someone who's looking at watching your heart disease risk, maybe we're looking at having one whole egg, but we scramble in some additional egg whites. The bottom line is that we really need to keep up on our blood work and understand where we fall. Is MSG unhealthy for you? And the short answer is no, it is not. What is MSG? It is monosodium glutamate. Glutamate is an amino acid that's found in a lot of foods that are probably already in your kitchen and already being consumed pretty regularly. Glutamate is found in Parmesan cheese, in mushrooms, walnuts, tomatoes, a steak. It's found in soy sauce. It's pretty prevalent. And so we are already consuming MSG even without intentionally adding MSG or eating out and knowing that it's in our food. So we know that the natural MSG versus added MSG, for example, there's no difference. The body cannot tell the difference between the two. And unfortunately, it's been decades long that the fear and the myth that MSG needs to be avoided still persists, despite much research that has debunked this myth. But it is not something to be feared. It is not something to be avoided. It is safe to consume. MSG is a flavor enhancer. So that glutamate, that amino acid glutamate, is really that fifth flavor taste that we can detect on our tongue. It's the umami flavor. You can actually buy MSG, use it in your cooking at home, and there's some health benefit to it, believe it or not. MSG is actually much lower in sodium than table salt. So if you're adding salt to a dish that you're cooking for dinner and you are replacing some of that salt with MSG, you're actually going to be reducing the total sodium intake and probably making your dish taste that much better. Are sugar-free drinks and diet alternatives better than the original version? So this is kind of the question, is Diet Pepsi better than regular Pepsi? Or if you're a Coke person, then is Diet Coke, preferred to regular Coke? And from a health perspective, we know that artificial sweeteners, or more recently, they're called non-nutritive sweeteners. These non-nutritive sweeteners are generally recognized as safe to consume in moderate amounts. And so again, what does that mean, that word moderate, or regular amounts? If you were to Google FDA artificial sweeteners, you're going to come up with this great chart. And so they've actually calculated how many packets per day, or let's say how many cans of diet soda per day, that you would need to consume in order to reach a potentially kind of dangerous level. And spoiler alert, it's quite a lot. But generally, we again don't want to be afraid of these non-nutritive sweeteners. We know that in general, Americans consume way too much added sugar. It's a huge problem for our risk for obesity, heart disease, type 2 diabetes. And so the sugar sweetened beverages are really what we're looking at. We're looking at the beverage category when we talk about these non-nutritive sweeteners. If we're consuming, two 12-ounce cans of regular Coke or Pepsi a day, and we switch that to the diet version, we are then saving a ton of added sugar and therefore calories. And so especially for those who are looking at their pre-diabetes or diabetes type 2 risk, that can really save a big, or that can make a really big impact over the course of the days and the weeks. But getting the added sugars down is a huge priority, and there's so much data around that. So the artificial sweeteners or non-nutritive sweeteners really do play a role in helping people to decrease that. So what are natural flavors? Great question. And do natural flavors affect our health? Natural flavors are the essence of a food, if you will. They are extracted from plant or animal sources. Food manufacturers are not required to list what food it came from. So that's why if you've ever looked on ingredients lists on foods that you consume, it'll just say natural flavors. That's it. You don't know what natural flavors. And so if you're someone who's looking at having, if you have a special diet or if you have food allergies, then that gets a little trickier to understand what's really in there. But for the rest of us, again, generally recognized as safe in the moderate amounts that we would typically consume. But as I was looking through just some common foods that we consume, our family, they're in everything from like the Waterloo sparkling waters that my husband likes to the Capri Sun juice boxes that my kids take to school. They are kind of everywhere in terms of processed foods. And so if you're looking to decrease the natural flavors that you consume, you can start kind of product by product, but going through your kitchen or your day and just looking at how many things actually have it, and going to a less processed version. From a health and safety standpoint, there's really not the data to suggest that we need to be fearful of natural flavors. You only receive calcium from dairy products. The answer is no. I will say dairy products give us the most bang for our buck in terms of the most calcium in, like, let's say a cup. So like a cup of milk or yogurt is going to give us roughly 250 to 300 milligrams of calcium. And to put that into perspective, most of us need about 1,000 milligrams of calcium per day. Some of us might need up to 1,200 milligrams per day, but it gives you an idea that if one serving of a food gives us 300, it's getting us a significant, portion of what we need in a day. There are plenty of non-dairy calcium sources though. So if you are just wanting to avoid dairy because you may be lactose sensitive or lactose intolerant, or maybe you're avoiding dairy for other reasons, then we can look to things like nuts and seeds, like almonds or chia seeds, or leafy greens, like putting spinach in your smoothie or cooking it into your pasta, kale, sardines. We've got things like fortified orange juice that often has almost more calcium than milk per cup sometimes, depending on the brand. So there are ways to get calcium through, non-dairy sources. And then what are the pros and cons of consuming non-dairy milks, for example? So these are alternative milks. We call them alt milks. And the alt milks are going to be things like almond milk, rice milk, coconut milk, oat milk. There's so many now in the milk aisle. So to start, we'll say that soy milk is not considered an alt milk. Soy milk nutritionally is pretty much right on par with dairy milk, which means that soy milk gives us protein, about 7 to 8 grams of protein per cup of milk, which is exactly what dairy milk gives us. So that's great. And then soy milk is also going to be fortified with the calcium. So you're getting the pretty much the same or similar nutrient profile between the two. So I do encourage soy milk for people who want to avoid the lactose or the dairy milk. Once we leave the dairy milk and the soy milk and we look at the rice or the almond or the oat or these other milks, it gets a little tricky because these milks do not contain protein, right? We don't need our milks necessarily to have protein. We just want to be aware that if we think we're getting protein in our almond milk, that we're really not, right? And that's confusing because almonds have protein. Almond milk does not. So in my mind, I kind of think of those milks like water. I think they're the low calorie options. A lot of times they are fortified with calcium. So if you're someone who can't do dairy, doesn't want to do soy for whatever the reason, maybe you choose almond milk. That's 30 calories a cup. It's got very little protein, but it has plenty of calcium. Then that would be a fine choice, as long as we're getting in a protein source or we understand that that milk isn't providing. It's really tricky. You've got to look for unsweetened. And if you really want to double check the nutrition facts panel, you want to look for added sugar, and it should say 0 grams, but a lot of them say 7 to 8 grams. With soy milk, there's a lot of fear and misconception around the need to avoid soy for maybe the estrogenic effects, or maybe men and boys shouldn't have soy, or, there's a lot of myths, again, perpetuating, but the data show that soy is actually a really great protein option for all of us. So we do know that soy is a healthful protein source. There's no saturated fat in soy because it's a plant. The edamame bean gets turned into the tofu or the soy milk. And so there's 0 saturated fat there, which again, we want to watch out for because of cholesterol reasons. And we know that consuming soy protein can help improve heart health, can help lower the risk for heart disease. There's no data showing that we need to be afraid of soy. That being said, not all soy is created equal. So like anything else, the further away you get from the plant, the original soybean, the more processed our food becomes. No need to be afraid of the soy. The estrogenic effects in plants are just not the same in humans. And so again, it's like that cholesterol connection where it would make sense that if we eat cholesterol, we raise our cholesterol. It's the same thing with soy. It just doesn't translate. So no need to fear, and we can include and enjoy soy. Can fermented foods cause stomach ulcers and or stomach cancer? So the answer here is, again, yes and no, but more no, if that makes sense. And so the fear here, where this kind of originated from, I will say, is that some research in Korean populations have shown higher rates of stomach cancer and ulcers, also in the Japanese population. It has been shown, though, that this kind of third piece of this picture plays a role, and that would be that more people in East Asian countries tend to have this H. pylori or Helicobacter pylori bacteria infection. And so it's a very common bacteria that affects the stomach. It can irritate and thin the lining of the stomach, making it more susceptible to things like ulcer or stomach cancer down the road. And so the thought is that it's this combination of having this H. pylori bacterial infection with the consumption of maybe salt fermented or salt pickled foods, such as kimchi, for example. And so is it the kimchi per se, or is it the fact that there's this H. pylori bacterial infection also going on. And that's really where I think the thought is right now in the research. More research needs to be done. But to put it in perspective, most people in the United States do not have the H. pylori bacterial infection. And that's transmitted through person to person contact. It's through contaminated food or water, and it's again very common. It's estimated that about half of the global population has this bacteria, and it's treated with antibiotics. But that's kind of the third piece of this. It's not a direct connection between eating fermented foods and, oh no, we have this increased risk for ulcers or stomach cancer. We do know that there may be some connection with the high salt intake of the fermented foods with, ulcer or cancer risk. But again, it's generally in the research in the context of that H. pylori bacterial infection. Separately, though, we know that fermented foods, as you've probably heard or read, are really beneficial for health, especially gut health and the microbiome, which is, the hot topic right now, but for good reason, because it is so important in our overall health. And so including fermented foods can be a great add to your diet if you don't already include them. But we know that eating these kind of good bugs, the probiotics, can help colonize our gut, and we want that. And those bacteria can then eat the fiber from the foods that we eat and then produce short chain fatty acids, which in short have all these health benefits for us. But we know that a lot of the immune function, 60 to 70, some estimates 80%, resides in our gut. And so if our gut and our microbiome aren't happy and diverse, then it's thought to really translate to, worse health outcomes. So I would say we don't need to be fearful again of this, of our fermented foods. We do want to include some on a regular basis. Is going on a gluten-free diet wise if you don't have an allergy or intolerance? And the answer here is a firm no. This is not one of those nuanced questions. No, we know that gluten is a protein. It is found in wheat. It is also found in rye and barley. So when we are talking about gluten-free diets, which have become very popular, we know that there are some people who truly medically need to avoid gluten. Those people would be those who have celiac disease, which is an autoimmune gluten allergy. People who maybe have some forms of IBS and have determined that gluten is a trigger. Some people who may have a wheat allergy, they're just allergic to all wheat, then that would be another group of people. But again, the overall amount of people needing to really truly avoid gluten is very low. I think, it's become so popular to be gluten-free or to go gluten-free because a lot of people are looking to lose weight. And it's kind of like a low carb way to lose weight. If you cut out gluten, you're probably cutting out a lot of carbs, right? And so, of course, weight loss will probably follow because calories went down, but not because gluten was the culprit or the enemy or the villain. So we know gluten-containing foods offer a lot of benefit. For example, whole wheat bread. If we were to go gluten-free, we'd be missing out on quite a bit of the fiber. We'd probably be missing out on some of the B vitamins. There's definite value to our whole grain foods. And a lot of times gluten-free products are made from rice or potato or corn. And not that any of those foods are, let's say, bad, but they are generally lower fiber foods. And a lot of times gluten-free products, like a gluten-free cracker, for example, might not be enriched or fortified with the vitamins and minerals the way that like a Triscuit or a wheat cracker might be. And so if we're doing these switches and making these changes in the pursuit of better health when we don't have the true medical need, we could actually be going in the wrong direction because we all need more fiber. And that's my favorite topic to talk about, dietitian, is fiber. And it doesn't just come from our carbohydrate foods. Fiber comes from vegetables and fruits and things like beans and lentils and nuts and chia seeds and all of that. But a large part will come from your oatmeal or your whole wheat bread on a sandwich, or, products that contain gluten are also going to contain a fair amount of fiber sometimes too. So no need to fear gluten, no need to be making these switches unless you know for a medical reason that you truly need to avoid it. So I hope I was able to answer some of your questions. If you want to follow along for more or reach out to connect, you can find me on Instagram at WongMSRD, which is my last name, WONGMSRD. And thank you for having me. Bye.